Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this third day of the European Sustainable Energy Week 2022. This week is flying by really fast, and I think today we've been tackling two of the most important topics in Europe's energy transition. This morning has been entirely dedicated to energy efficiency, and something that is clear is that it's a no-brainer that we need to boost our energy savings and increase our energy efficiency. Now, this afternoon, I believe we're going to be looking into another one of the no-brainers, which is that if we want to achieve our 55% emissions reduction objective by 2030 and increase also our energy independence, then the uptake of renewables is crucial. So what are all the technologies that are at stake, and what do we need to do about it? This is what we will answer, I think, this afternoon in this thematic block dedicated exclusively to renewable energies, this stop along this journey that is Sustainable Energy Week 2022. To look into the role of each one of these technologies can play, I would like to give the floor to Katarina Sikov-Magny. She's the Director for Green Transition and Energy Systems Integration at the European Commission's Directorate General for Energy. And she will give us a taste also of what is expected to come in this afternoon. So, Katarina, thank you so much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Many thanks and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very pleased to be here today to speak about a topic that we can call a no-brainer. I think it is something which indeed should be self-evident to all of us, and I'm sure it is. But if we look back, so last year in the EUSEW, we were already then very well aware of the importance of renewable energy to achieve our goal in becoming carbon neutral by 2050. Looking back again last year, so 2 months before the EUSEW week, the Commission had published the first wave of legislative proposals under the name Fit for 55, which included a dozen of proposals, including also the review of the Renewables Directive, which then proposed to increase the target from 32% to 40% by 2030. The proposal then also put forward obligations on pushing renewables into the what we may call hard-to-abate sectors. Changing power sector into renewable has been is well underway and is a degree perhaps easier, but now time is also to look at the hard-to-abate sectors, industry, buildings, transport, and the rest. A year ago, we knew that 40% renewables would be ambitious, but doable. Many sectors were moving very fast already, and especially the cost of the technologies had come dramatically down. So if we think of onshore wind, where the levelized cost has decreased by 54% in the last decade due to economies of scale, competition, and also the maturation of the industry. In solar, the cost curve has come down even faster. So between 2010 and 2020, the global levelized cost of utility scale PV has declined by 85%. So incredible numbers. Both of these technologies are now cheaper for electricity production than fossil fuels. And that's, I'm speaking about a year ago. Now, of course, the situation is different. There is the unprovoked war in Ukraine that Russia started. And we now see electricity, energy prices in general, skyrocketing, going through the roof. So again, today, renewables is a key way of getting out from the dependency on Russian fuels, be it in heating, be it in electricity or other uses. this unprecedented challenge, and as you know, Russia has already cut gas supply to 13 member states. They have cut electricity exports to Finland. So already many things had happened. And the Commission came out with the Repower EU package, which was our answer to the situation and to the need to diversify and phase out Russian fossil fuels by 2027, so even faster than our targets for 2030 are. And here, renewables are clearly at the center, in addition to energy efficiency. By speeding up the deployment of renewables, we can, on the one hand, replace fossil fuels and soften the impact of the crisis on the electricity bill, and also give jobs and growth to our economy, which is certainly suffering from the current high prices. Calculations have shown that the increase in the use of renewable energy between 2005 and 2020 substituted around 160 million tons of fossil fuels. So this shows the huge potential that there is to further fossil fuel savings by deployment of renewables. As part of the Repower EU, we also then increased the 2030 target for renewables. So remember, we had increased it from 32 to 40, and now we propose to increase it to 45% by 2030. It is ambitious, as the 40% was ambitious, but again, it is doable, and with the current prices, it is also cost efficient. And I think we all can see, if we look at our electricity bills at home, that if we had solar panels on the roof, for instance, the situation would be different in terms of the bills. So quite a wise economic investment. If we look at the past then, in 2020, where the target was 20% for renewables, we did overachieve. So we had 22.1% of renewables in the mix in 2020. But here, of course, we need to keep in mind that 2020 was the year when COVID hit us, which led to reduced electricity consumption because of lower economic activities. Therefore, we do not expect 2021 to see a huge increase in renewables in comparison to that. But what we do expect is that there would be a steep increase for 2030, and we would need almost tripling of the average annual increase to reach that target. So we are speaking about a massive need of investments in less than a decade. What we need to then do to achieve these targets, one, of course, is to make sure that permits are provided, are given rapidly to those who want to invest in renewables. Today, it used to take 9 years for wind and something like 4.5 years for solar. You can just make rapidly the calculation of this, and 2030 is actually then already here. And Commission has proposed legislation to speed up and to streamline the permitting processes, including also the environmental assessments therein. And here I would like to underline that it is not cutting corners, it's not lowering quality, but it is to speed up and streamline the processes and removing inefficiencies in the process. So we can continue having our very high environmental standards respected, whilst providing much faster permits to the promoters who want to invest in renewables. We have, as part of the legal proposal that is currently discussed in the Council and in the European Parliament, provided or requiring member states to designate so-called go-to areas, which are, let's say, environmentally not valuable areas, but where renewables would be very suitable to be invested in. And for such go-to areas, then the permitting processes should not last more than 1 year. So that's a huge streamlining from what it is today. And for solar, on existing building structures, we propose a maximum permitting time of 3 months to go ahead. And these, of course, are essential in order to get the renewables in place on the decarbonization target, but now also in order to phase out Russian fossil fuels. In order to then help the sectors or the economies or member states to work on renewables, we have presented a couple of strategies. One is the EU Solar Strategy, whereby we would want to see 320 gigawatts of solar photovoltaic by 2025, which is more than doubling the situation as it is today, and then almost 600 giga by 2030. The interesting element here is that we would also want to see the solar industry come back to Europe, if I call it like that. Because you recall that at some point in history, Europe was the leading provider of solar panels. Then China took over, which has of course been very beneficial for us, because buying cheap panels from China has made the transition faster. But now with the increased ambition and the need to provide new technological solutions for solar, like, I mean, we all hear about having our windows as panels or having the facade of a building as solar panels. They require a different approach where Europe can and should be again the leader in these areas. So we do want to bring the solar industry back, and we are about to launch a European Solar PV Industry Alliance to this effect. But solar is not, of course, the only technology. There are heat pumps, geothermal and solar thermal that need to be stepped up. Onshore and increasingly more offshore wind, ocean energy, and in all areas storage. We also need to build up those technologies and the capacities and the industrial leadership for Europe. We expect by 2030 that our power sector should be 69% renewable. And this, of course, will also require other type of technologies to make sure that we can have electricity 24/7 with all the variability that comes with wind and solar in particular, also requiring flexibility. Another area in the Repower EU where we are stepping up efforts and is biomethane and renewable hydrogen. And biomethane in particular is abundantly available through waste and manure, which we do have everywhere in the EU, would be a domestic source and can be easily fed into the gas grid. Renewable hydrogen, also something important which is emerging, and there is a lot of interest and a lot of projects being planned as we speak. But of course, in order to have renewable hydrogen, we need to have the renewable electricity to transform through electrolyzers. So both two areas, we have set again targets in biomethane, reaching 35 million BCM, and for hydrogen, 10 million tons domestically and 10 million tons imports. This, of course, all requires, in addition to permitting that I already touched upon, also availability of funding for investments. Most of the investments, of course, will come from the market. These are commercial investments where companies can compete in order to make their business and profits. But there are a number of EU instruments that can help, especially in the very early phases when a technology is still not fully mature. And here we speak about, of course, the Next Generation EU, various funds like Horizon Europe, Innovation Fund, then a specific clean hydrogen partnership, for instance, and also for infrastructure Connecting Europe facility. In all these areas, the Repower EU has 4 activities that I would rapidly mention in the context of hydrogen. So first, increase the production and demand of hydrogen, focusing first in replacing the hydrogen produced from gas. Then stepping up and accelerating investments in the value chain. Third, ensure that infrastructure is in place when we will need cross-border transport. And then lastly, step up our international engagement on the renewable hydrogen imports. This all should lead into a stronger renewables industrial base in Europe. And that is always good for jobs and growth in the economy, which is today suffering from the high prices and need to replace. So Repower EU is aiming also at boosting EU manufacturing. So I already mentioned the Solar Alliance, which has an objective to innovation-led expansion of the industrial value chain, especially in the PV manufacturing sector. We are working with the industry also to scale up the electrolyzer manufacturing capacity in order for Europe to be the leader of the intelligent electrolyzers, if I call them like that. Electrolyzers that would then be used in a flexible manner. So when there is oversupply of renewable electricity, they would be producing hydrogen, but at moments when there would be scarcity or demand would be very high elsewhere, they could slow down their production and then come back again when there is availability of electricity. So would add also to stabilizing the prices. Europe is a leader in this kind of a flexible technology in electrolyzers, whereas China, for instance, is producing more the type of bulk electrolyzers that have to produce 24/7 all the time, irrespective of what is the availability of renewables. So again, good way for European industry to become world leader. And in wind, then the market trends in the EU show that the increased cost of production and supply chain challenges have created certain complexity in the sector. And for this reason, we are certainly monitoring closely the supply chain to maintain the European technological leading position, looking in particular at the current dependencies and criticalities where we import part of the components. So in this area, we launched in March the supply chain resilience platform that would help companies, especially SMEs, to retain, restructure or replace existing supply chains. And we will also address the criticality of raw materials by proposing a legislative measure, and we are working with international partners to reinforce cooperation and ensure secure supply also through trade diversification. And lastly here, a working group on offshore energy has been created under Clean Energy Industrial Forum to analyze the resilience of offshore supply chain. So a lot of good news, a lot of world-leading technologies, but also a lot to be done still to ensure that the supply chains work, that we have access to raw materials, and that we can continue to be the world leader or become the world leader where we are not that currently. All in all, the investments needed for these additional investments to meet the REPowerEU objectives amount to 210 billion euro between now and 2027. So with the aim to phase out Russian fossils from our mix. This is ambitious, but again, the Recovery and Resilience Facility is providing a big boost to member states in complement to the cohesion policy funds and innovation fund, modernization fund, and all the rest together with the EIB. On the political front, if we then look at member states, there is a strong commitment to work on ambitious targets, and we have seen many member states largely exceed their calculated targets or their legally binding targets for 2020 and are on good path to increase this further. So what we would now want to call for member states is to make sure that the Renewables Directive will be rapidly adopted in the co-legislation process together with the Parliament. And then to conclude, looking at the afternoon's program, I'm very happy to see that it will cover a wide variety of issues. Partially I touched upon, but partially not, and we'll look really forward to hearing also on the zero-emission buildings to sustainable transport fuel, offshore wind, solar strategy, and many more. So I thank you for your attention and wish you a very, very interesting afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarina, for providing this great overview indeed of what's to come in this afternoon. So with this, we are kicking off our thematic block on renewable energies. And if you've been with us before, you know the drill. If not, in any case, then we're going to have two sessions, two slots of policy sessions, and each slot will have 3 parallel sessions. So either here in the Gasperi room or in the other 2. So make sure to select the session that you would like to attend. And in any case, there will be a replay of all the sessions available shortly after. We're going to have also a coffee break in between at 4 p.m. So thank you very much to all of you for your attention, and see each other around.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the session on renewable and low-carbon fuels, scaling up for sustainable aviation and waterborne transport. I am Michał Kubicki. I'm Policy Officer in DG Move, responsible for Renewable and Low-Carbon Fuels Industrial Alliance, and I will be your host for the upcoming 1.5 hours. I have an honor to replace Axel Volkeri, our Deputy Head of Unit in the team, who unfortunately excused for being here due to an urgent and sudden sickness. We all wish him a fast recovery. In this session today, we will discuss how to address crucial challenges to greening the transport sector in Europe, in particular in aviation and waterborne sectors, and what is the role of renewable and low-carbon fuels in this transformation. In the panel today, we have Julien Rossi from the EU, Head of EU Representation from Safran. We have Paolo Giulia, Innovation Manager from Fincantieri, joining us remotely. We have Emanuela Sardeliti, Advocacy Strategy Executive from Fuels Europe. We have Felicia Mester, Director of Public Affairs from Hydrogen Europe. And we have Celia Sapar, Director of Climate Science and Communications from CO Value Europe. Before we actually start and get to the panelists, I have an ice-breaking question, and I want to ask our team to put the Slido question on display. We would want to ask you, everybody in the room, and also that join us remotely, to write in the cloud that will be showed to this very simple question: what is the first word that comes to your mind when you hear renewable and low-carbon fuels? So let's give it a moment, and I would want everybody to open your tablets and phones and try to connect to that question, and we will see what's coming in. Of course, the first big word is hydrogen. That's good. Green hydrogen is also there. Ammonia, methanol, green ammonia. So we see all the interests that actually are coming through the synthetic and the role of hydrogen. That's really good. Have a moment to code. This cloud will actually be very helpful for our discussion today. We have also a number of other keywords coming in. We see the role of biofuels coming also, very visible. The question of carbon capture and use, biofuels, infrastructure, and also natural gas and LNG and CNG. So that's interesting cloud that we see. Of course, hydrogen is a big winner of this contest. All right, I think this is really a good start for the discussion. So seeing all that, I will spend now a couple of minutes to explain to you what is actually the alliance that we are building, and also will elaborate on why the composition of the panel is not really arbitrary, and that there is a big connection with the alliance. So on the next slide, please to advance, or maybe I can do it directly here. No. Oh, yeah, it works. So the Renewable and Low-Carbon Fuels Value Chain Industrial Alliance is a new platform that we have set up to help decarbonize the transport sector. It all started, of course, with the Green Deal, when we have put a challenge for us to decarbonize, to reduce the emissions by 90% by 2050 in all transport modes. Then from that, we needed to move to the strategy, how to actually do it. And the EU Commission has come forward with the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, where we have said that to act on demand, we will need regulatory instruments. And to act on the supply side, we actually need a new kind of venture. We need to have all industry on board. And to get to that, we can use a tested and quite successful instrument, which is industrial alliances. In the Fit for 55 communication, we have come forward with the first part of the puzzle, so the two regulatory proposals, the Refuel EU Aviation and Fuel EU Maritime. And with those proposals, we hope to actually create a market, well, if that works, then I can show you. Oh, yeah. We want to create a market for fuels for those two transport modes. If these proposals are passed, we actually expect that by 2050, the growth in the maritime and aviation for both synthetic and bio-based fuels will be a dominant growth factor. And even though the road sector today is the major consumer of those fuels, and we expect it to grow, actually in the decade after 2030, we expect that that there will be a peak, and all the demand and all the growth will actually be in the waterborne in aviation sectors. And to get to that, to actually advance to that, of course, we will use, well, again, very hard to press. Yeah, we will use those two regulatory instruments. They have different approaches, but with the same purpose, advancing the demand for the drop-in fuels in the maritime and aviation. They are all already in the Council and the Parliament. We expect that the trilogues will kickstart soon and be progressing very fast. That is, of course, on acting on the demand side. On the supply side, we needed to create. Well, that is really not working. Well, we wanted to create a venture that combines all the industry. We set two major objectives. We want to boost rapidly demand and supply for the renewable and low-carbon fuels for maritime and aviation. We want to create an industry value chain that is very well connected with the global markets. Therefore, we want to have an open platform. We want to have a deep involvement of the industry from the beginning. Therefore, we created a governance structure that involves industry, and actually starting from the steering group, which today in the panel we have actually all the representatives from the steering group of the Alliance, from Fincantieri, Safran, Fuels Europe, and Hydrogen Europe. We created a set of specific objectives that how do we want to get to that point, and we have already adopted the first work plan. The Alliance itself is growing rapidly, and at present we have more than 160 members, and that is really not working, yes. From across the value chain, we have a good representation of a lot of sectors and stakeholders, starting from the fuel suppliers, going through the distribution channels to the end users. We also have representation from public bodies and financial institutions. So what is coming actually next? The next is we need to prepare to how to create the pipeline of projects that will be a baseline of our alliance. And to prepare that project, we need a guidelines actually on what kind of projects are most needed. And these guidelines essentially will be provided by the 4 roundtables that we are establishing. The call for applications has been launched last week, and all members of the alliance are welcome to delegate their experts. And that's where actually I need to stop, because I need to ask the questions to our panelists on the role and how do they see the future in these fuels, and how and what is the greatest added value for their participation in the alliance. So I will start from giving the voice to Julien Rossi, who will be our first speaker in the session today.
Thank you, Michel. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Julien Rossi, and I am the head of Safran EU Representation Office here in Brussels. I don't know if the slides are there. So as maybe some of you already know, Safran is an engine manufacturer and equipment manufacturer for all civil aviation and also military aviation. So why Safran is so involved in the alliance in the sustainable aviation fuels? First of all, as an engine manufacturer, we are there to remove all the technical barriers that will impede the massive deployment and uptake of sustainable aviation fuel. This is our main responsibility, our main duty, and this is all our action is about today. And our main purpose is to work not only on the possibility or the technological ability to use sustainable aviation fuels, but also efficiency of our engine. But we have also a deep role in sustainable aviation fuel deployment because we are deeply involved in certification of these fuels, and also because we think that leading by example is a key way to increase their usage around the value chain in Europe. So we put up a lot of action in our strategy regarding SAF, and one of the key action was to try at least to bring our little contribution to the cause and bring all the actors together with all the representatives around the industry and the association that you have here today, and to work together to increase the deployment of sustainable aviation fuel. So why is it so much important for us today? Because sustainable aviation fuel is a key lever to decarbonize aviation. And I'm saying this also because the entire aviation industry is clearly aware of the legitimate concerns that civil society has regarding the contribution, sometimes say negative contribution, to climate change. And this is why we took altogether a strong commitment towards carbon neutrality by 2050. And this is not only a merely political declaration, we are acting on this very concretely. And for that, we designed a specific decarbonization roadmap. And in this roadmap, as you can see on your screen, 4 levers have been identified to decarbonize aviation. And the key one, because it's an immediate and already available solution, is sustainable aviation fuels. This is clearly the first way to decarbonize our sector because it's available today. We have already 9 certified sustainable aviation fuel pathways, which means that they can already be used by aircrafts in our current engine without any technological modification, up to 50% in a blend with kerosene. And this is something that, for us, is in our hands. The only issue is how we can deploy this massively. And I must say that what is clearly encouraging for us is that beside the EU, all over the world, we have a clear multiplication, diversification of initiatives regarding sustainable aviation fuels. You can see on your screen that very recently also some key countries in the aviation sector have taken concrete commitments for the deployment of sustainable aviation fuels, where it is US, naturally, UK, Brazil, Turkey, Singapore, and naturally the European Union. And what it is very positive for us is that the demand today is there. What you can see on your screen is the latest figures from ICAO, which clearly shows that today we have a really strong demand for sustainable aviation fuels around the world, given also the number of tech agreements that have been announced and signed by airlines, but also the volumes that fuel producers and their clients have agreed upon. So the question is how we can make the production match this demand. And for us in the aviation industry and in Safran specifically, this is all the Alliance is about. So we are very, very honored of being the first chairman of the Aviation Chamber of the Alliance, because really we think that the Alliance is a real concrete positive tool to increase and to accelerate the deployment of SAF around Europe. First of all, because the visibility that investors and producers needed to have hopefully will be more present and clear for them with the RefuelEU aviation negotiation that is expected to end by year end. And once the regulatory framework will be in place, then it will be up to us, industrialists, to make make SAF be an uptake more and more by airlines. So the challenge of our alliance is clear today, is how we bring all the producers, all the clients together and work together to increase SAF uptake. And we are speaking on things very, very concrete actions that we also agreed upon between all the members of the alliance in our first General Assembly on 12th of July. The first one, naturally, is to coordinate all the SAF value chain, from feedstock providers to airlines, with airports, energy producers, OEMs like us, like Rolls-Royce, like Airbus, and also airlines. So everyone around the table, just to understand where are the barriers, what is impeding today the deployment of SAF. And then we will develop a clear SAF, technological SAF roadmap. I was speaking before of 9 certified SAF pathway at ASTM level, which is, as some of you may know, the International Association for Standards. How can we make this pathway goes to mass production, from R&D to mass production? What are the obstacles we need to overcome in order to really increase that production? And we will try also to imagine new SAF supporting mechanisms, such as contract for difference or book and claim mechanism, which is one of the most interesting mechanisms that is, at least for airlines and airports, a key lever to deploy SAF around Europe. And lastly, we need to also contribute to this pipeline of projects to which Michel was referring before. Why? Because what you can see on your screen, the little map on the right, always coming from ICAO, is all the SAF production projects around the world with a specific focus on Europe. And all the blue circles are concretely SAF production capacities that are already operational in Europe. What we need today is to convert all these gray bubble or gray circles in blue circles. This means that very concretely we'll fit the SAF projects with SAF project, the pipeline investments we are trying to build, and then accelerate our production capacities in Europe. Thank you.
Let's now move to our second speaker on the list, and that would be Paolo Guglia from Fincantieri. Yes, we can see you and we can hear you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And I'm honored to be here today. I apologize for not being in presence. It was impossible to me, but it's really a nice opportunity that I have to introduce you with the maritime sector. I have some slides. So if you could start with slide number 3. Before talking about the importance of the renewable low carbon fuels for Alliance for Maritime, let me just briefly introduce you on why maritime is important for the European economy. First of all, 90% of the value of worldwide trade goods are traded by maritime. And maritime is responsible for 4.2 million direct jobs in the entire waterborne sector. These are the very impressive number. The previous one, please. And at the same time, maritime is accountable for 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions, and which is equal to 2.9% of the overall total CO2 emissions. There are targets from both the European Commission by 2030 and reducing by 55% compared to 1990 these emissions, and also according to the initial IMO GHG strategy to reduce by 40% the CO2 intensity with reference to 2008. Okay, then I'm coming to this slide, in which I summarized in terms of GHG emission, not CO2 emission, but GHG emission. So it's about a bit slightly above 1 billion ton. What are the historical data? What is the expected trend? And also what are the targets by 2050 from the initial IMO GHG strategy, so minus 50% referring to 2008, or the European Commission targets to get close to zero. What is important from this slide? It is important to noticing that the size of decrease compared to the business as usual that we have to achieve even looking at the IMO target is more or less the size of the emissions that we have today, which is double the effort if we want to get completely to zero emission. So next one, please. And how can we get there? we can keep working on incremental innovation or disruptive, maybe also disruptive innovation on energy efficiency on board a ship, on ship optimization, on the operational profile, on increasing digitalization level on board ships, or increasing also emission filtering or capture technologies. All these aspects are in any case important and needs to be pursued, but they will not bring to zero. I mean, they will support and accompany a trajectory toward reduction on emission, but they will not bring us to zero. We need, if you want to get to zero, we need to address the first two boxes in the second, in the lower bar, which is fuels and power generation system. So if we want to get to zero emission, we need to have either carbon-free fuels or net zero carbon, net zero emission fuels to be installed on board, which is quite a Copernican revolution for maritime. It's an enormous transformation, and which is introducing another aspect for which I'm going to answer also the question of Mihai. What is the value added of the Renewable Low Carbon Fuel Industrial Value Chain Alliance? If we look at this chart, it comes very, very clear that solving the problem on offshore, so in maritime shipping, is something that you need to tackle on board the ship, but also onshore, so in the entire value chain for the fuel production. Because if we want to have net zero or zero fuels, we need to tackle the entire value chain upstream from renewables, energy grid, power to fuel, fuel distribution, availability, and availability especially in ports. Next one, please. This is exactly what the Renewable Low Carbon Fuel Industrial Value Chain Alliance is targeting with its objectives. I mean, tackling the lack of availability and affordability of renewable low carbon fuels for the waterborne transport in my case, and to rapidly boost the production, storage, and distribution capacity. You can see that the area in yellow is the area which is relevant to the renewable low carbon fuel. And for the waterborne sector, this is going to tackle biofuel, synthetic fuel, derivatives, ammonia, methanol, etc., and the direct use of hydrogen. In maritime, we say that, and we assume that there is no silver bullet, because different fuels may address different kind of segments of the European of the maritime shipping. Next one, please. As Mihai explained, there are two. The alliance is structured in two chambers: maritime and aviation, and then there are four working groups. One of these working groups is dedicated to water transport. Working group, it's a round table. One of these round tables is about water transport. And the challenges for the water transport roundtable can be divided in three areas: technical, operational, and economical. From the technical point of view, there is the necessity to identify what is the fuel pathway characterization, which starts with the definition of and mapping of technology and commercial readiness levels, and also in identifying gaps for the standardization, certification, and safety. From the operational point of view, we have fuel certification, the definition of standards or minimum requirements, let's call it like this, for contract templates, the optimization of renewable low carbon fuel availability, and looking at what part of the value chain needs to be addressed first and needs to be more supported, and then the decision-making support for the supply chain development according to the pathway characterization and the needs also from the end users, so from maritime. From the economical point of view, defining standards and minimum requirement for contract for difference is absolutely important, but also understanding what is the cost structure breakdown for fuels in order to assess the total cost of ownership for the maritime shipping. The next one, please. In the water transport roundtable in this year and the next year, 22-23, we will focus on a workflow which is subdivided in six items. The first one is to develop a common knowledge basis on the applicability of different renewable low carbon fuels in maritime. Then the mapping of technology and commercial readiness level for different fuels and different pathways, as well, third point, the feasibility of utilization of different renewable low carbon fuels in various and different maritime segments. As I said before, there is no silver bullet, so we may also end up on assessing that the different fuels may fit different maritime segments. Fourth point is the renewable carbon fuel certification, definition of minimum standards for renewable carbon fuel certification compatible to FuelEU Maritime, and the guidance for drafting fuel supply contract templates. What is most important is item number 6, which is the definition and identification of a pipeline of existing and new investment projects, because in another roundtable, the Alliance will also identify what are the funding instruments and funding possibility that are going to support these investments. And the next one, and my last one, please. In July, at the General Assembly, we had the first Maritime panel with key speakers. We tried to identify what are the key takeaways from the discussion. And what came out from the maritime sector is that from the perspective of the classification society, there is the need to have more certainty and simplicity regarding rules, regulations, certifications, in order to support the sector in a transition. Ports are very important, and as I think they are a pivotal role in providing the availability of this fuel, but also in the feasibility, in regulation, and in price, ensuring a price which is compatible with traditional fuels for maritime transport. Ship owners emphasize the need of financing and funding instruments for supporting the transition, and this can be done through the revenues of the EU emission trading system to facilitate the transition of the sector. Carbon contract for difference are again emphasized as one of the possible and very promising instruments to support the transition. Clear incentive for the development of sustainable marine fuels are needed. The voice of shipbuilder and equipment manufacturers emphasized that there is the need of developing in Europe the capacity of having innovative technologies and to build zero-emission vessels or to retrofit existing zero-emission vessels. Right regulatory framework condition needs to be established because the competitiveness and a level playing field is of paramount importance. So sectorial policies needs to be put in place for shipbuilding. Last one. We are honored at Fincantieri to chair the Maritime Chamber, and we are convinced that the renewable low carbon fuels will play an important role to accelerate and enable the sustainability of the maritime sector. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Paolo. Both Fincantieri and Safran are members of the steering group of the Alliance to give us insights into the operations of those two important pillars of the waterborne and aviation sectors, to guide us on aspects related to those two transport modes. But we also need insights on the higher levels in the value chain, so the fuel producers and sourcing. And that's why in the steering group we also have Fuels Europe and Hydrogen Europe. They also provide secretariat support to the Alliance. And I have first on our list Emanuela Sardeliti from Fuels Europe, who will be our next speaker. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Emanuela Sardellitti, Advocacy Strategy Executive at Fuels Europe. So today, I'm going to illustrate to you the role of low-carbon fuels in the policy context of the Alliance, as described by Michael so far. So, yep, okay. So, we know all that the EU has been undertaking the energy transition, but now we know most that the energy transition is happening amidst international crises, unexpected circumstances, industrial and economic downturns, and critical situations and social risks. All elements that were not present when the Fit for 55 package was published. And therefore, more than ever, we need to consider and reconsider the role and the importance and the potential of low-carbon fuels for helping us to achieve a multiple set of objectives. First of all, to achieve the 2050 net climate neutral goal, which is set by the EU regulation and the EU law. And then also meet at our societal needs and ensuring and strengthening the resilience of the EU transport value chain. Yeah, so now we know that already for over 100 years, we have been relying on liquid fuels for our transport needs, mainly for transport, and we have done so because of some qualities they have. Energy density, easy and safe to use, the easy distribution and storage, as well as the existence of the infrastructure. Liquid fuels that we have been relying on so far are mainly from petroleum origin. But with the transition, with the net zero goal that we need to achieve by 2050, we need to change all these assumptions and we need to change the pattern. Therefore, we need to shift and make fossil fuel being replaced progressively by low carbon fuels. Let's crossing the T, dotting the I's with some reference to the words, what low-carbon liquid fuels are. They are renewable and sustainable liquid fuels from non-petroleum origin. They are produced in a sustainable way from different sources, municipal or organic waste, sustainable biomass, renewable energy, and circular CO2. So they emit CO2 in the atmosphere, which is biogenic and recycled. So, in other words, low-carbon fuels are non-fossil, but they do the same job as the conventional fuels that we are accustomed to now, such as petrol, diesel, marine fuels, and jet fuels. At this point in time, we know that they can be easily introduced in the market because they don't need further or additional infrastructure. We can use already what we have in place now. At this point in time, there is little quantities of these fuels into the market, but we need more. Otherwise, we cannot meet the objective that the EU set for ourselves. And we cannot deliver the climate ambition that it is set by law. The Fit for 55 has called all industries, all parts of society, to take part and partake in the transformational change towards the climate neutrality. The good news is that the EU fuel manufacturing industry has already undergone such a transformation, and it is already a reality. But we need some help from the stakeholders community. And back on this in a moment. So our industry has repeatedly demonstrated over the time its capability to innovate, to evolve, to respond to the economic circumstances, and to adapt according to the regulatory processes and frameworks. Soon after the Paris Agreement, the EU fuel manufacturing industry elaborated its vision for the 2050 goal. And now we have the Clean Fuels for All, which is a comprehensive pathway where you can see now a combination of technologies and the projection of investments that are needed in order to reach the climate neutrality of our industry and to deliver the net zero ambition. Let's have a look at these Clean Fuels for All in numbers. So you see that on the left-hand side, you have a combination of technologies, starting with the first generation biofuels with the cap based on the current RED, Renewable Energy Directive, currently in place. The cap is set as mandated by the directive at 7%. Then we have HVOs, produced from sustainable vegetable oils and waste. Then we have biomass to liquid to transform lignocellulosic and residues and waste materials into biofuel. And finally, we have the synthetic fuels. On the site, we have CCS, US, and clean hydrogen. These are additional mitigating options that can be immediately applicable in the industrial site. All these together, all these technologies need a boost from the investment side and can be ramped up alongside some investments. Our member companies elaborated a sort of investment plan in order to deliver by 2050 a situation where every liter of fuel is climate neutral. In order to do so, we have a sort of investment plan, a comprehensive pathway, matching technologies with investment needs, and the investment needed are ranging from 400 billion to 500 billions from now to 2050. As you can see, is an immense amount of investment to be put in place, but the technology is there. To simplify, let's have a look at a couple of families. So the first, low carbon fuels produced from sustainable biomass. The second family, low carbon fuels produced from renewable energy, water, and recycled CO2. Renewable low carbon liquid fuels produced from biomass are produced from non-food feedstock. I want to underline that. Such as lignocellulosic biomass, and this includes wood, forest residues, but also agricultural residues and other waste, industrial waste, that cannot be further used. This umbrella brings me to another very important topic, which is the sustainability of the biomass. We know that the advanced and waste biofuels are very often dismissed for an alleged scarcity of the biomass, sustainable biomass availability, and because of potential harm to biodiversity. In order to shed the light on this very critical yet sensitive topic, we CONCAUE, the scientific branch of Fuels Europe, committed a study, a recent study, to the Imperial College London on the sustainable biomass availability in the EU by 2050, also considering 2030. And the study shows that there is a huge potential in Europe of sustainable biomass. And this huge potential does not harm the biodiversity. The study is very conservative, therefore it was not considered any potential addition to the list of the Annex 9 in the current RED directive, and other conservative assumptions have been taken on board in order to be on the safest side. So the conclusion, but I would like to invite you to click on the study in order to deep dive on that, if you are interested too. The conclusion of the study is, with such a conservative estimate, the potential availability of sustainable biomass in Europe is more than sufficient to allow advanced and waste biofuels to drive us to the climate neutrality for the decarbonization of the EU transport. So I would like to invite you to click on that. And also the job creation has been estimated to be quite significant. The second family is about synthetic fuels, the ones that are known mainly as e-fuels. They are produced from renewable energy, recycled CO2, and water. While for example, HVOs, we have industrial site already in place. For this, we have some pre-industrial scale projects, either in Europe and outside, but we expect the deployment of a first-of-a-kind plant industrial site already by 2025, and 4 years later, 2029, we might have the ambition to have a mass deployment of the synthetic fuels industrial site. But most importantly, in order to show you that what I'm saying to you now is not only a political statement from an industry, but it is something that it is happening already on the ground, I would like to share with you this map, where every dot corresponds to low-carbon initiatives from our member companies across the member states in Europe. And I would like to draw your attention on a couple of these red circles, where some very important transformations have been already taken place. All dots that you see are corresponding to low-carbon initiatives at different level of readiness, so from the initial phases, project cycle, or even industrial reality. The 3 dots that I would like to underline are corresponding to 3 different realities, 2 in Italy, 1 in France. So let's start with the oldest somehow. So Eni, 2014, converted a conventional refinery into a bio refinery, and now it is an industrial site, operational, full operationally, and is now producing HVOs. Moving to France, 2015, TotalEnergies performed a similar transformation in La Mède biorefinery, producing now moving from a conventional refinery to a biorefinery, producing now biodiesel and biojet for aviation. And finally, 2019, back to Italy, Eni in Gela performed the transformation of, again, a conventional refinery to a biorefinery. The project was launched in 2019, and they are now working at producing biofuels from vegetable, castor oils, used cooking oils, and animal fat and algae. So this is in a nutshell to show you that there is something already ongoing, and what it is going, it's already important, but might be even more relevant than it is now. And this brings me to the conclusion, because I show you that moving from fossil to low-carbon fuels is possible. It is more than a reality. It is already happening. But in order to let our transformation being a success, we need some help from the multi-stakeholder environment. First of all, we need to ensure that the environment for the investment is an enabler. Secondly, our industry needs a sort of flexibility in the pool of feedstock, as long as they are sustainable, of course. It is important that we not exclude a priori any technology options. And finally, the recognition for our industry to move further of the transitional period to adapt. We need a bit of time to adapt. So let me conclude by saying that Fuels Europe and its members are very, very keen on partaking this journey with the Commission and other stakeholders in the Renewable Low-Carbon Fuel Value Chain Alliance. We really believe that the alliance is a key leverage for promoting the development at scale of these fuels that are really needed in order to ensure that the EU delivers what has promised to do. But moreover, we need a political vision. And we strongly believe that the context of the alliance might really ensure the political vision that so far sometimes has been missing. I stop here. I thank you for your attention and pass the floor back to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Emanuela. Thank you, Emanuela. This was really an encouraging message about the need for our alliance. Earlier today, earlier at the session, we have seen the cloud, which really featured the role of hydrogen, and so much that I'm really happy that as part of our steering group and also the Secretariat, we have Hydrogen Europe represented. And today we have with us Felicia Mester, the Director of Public Affairs from Hydrogen Europe, and will give us important contribution about the role of hydrogen, and that will be also in this production of these fuels. Thank you.
Let's see if the clicker works for me. There we go. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and let me repeat something you've heard many times, many times today. It is such a pleasure to meet you in person. I was very happy to hear a bit earlier what Michael said about the need to establish alliances in order to match supply and demand, the need to bring all industry on board. Indeed, this alliance is a great opportunity for bridging supply and demand, bringing together industry, 160 members to date. It is such a pleasure to be one of the organizations seeing this alliance grow. I'd like to bring a bit broader of a picture to what my co-panelists have mentioned before, and say a few things about what we actually have in terms of targets. From my perspective, of course, as Hydrogen Europe, in addition to looking at end-use sectors, we also look very closely at, well, how do we actually produce this hydrogen? What kind of instruments do we need in order to channel it towards the right direction, at infrastructure and so on? But I'm going to stick to this topic for a second here. So looking at the RED 2 and at the REPowerEU, we essentially have two main big objectives for the mobility sector. One, of course, the 13% overall target for greenhouse gas emissions, and the second one, that is a sub-target, or rather a few sub-targets. 2.6 Renewables sub-target suggested by the European Commission. Of course, it was then increased, but we'll talk about that in a second. And then advanced biofuels, conventional biofuels, and others. But the graph aims to illustrate a breakdown of the different targets and how they will add up to the whole lot of alternative fuels by 2030. The contribution of Renewables is colored in orange. I hope you can see it. If we compare it in the greater picture of things, it is rather modest. There is also a gray part that's the middle sort of column. There's also a great part that we couldn't quite model. So we initially thought it's supposed to go towards electrification as well. But then when we looked at the REPowerEU and at the 5% of Renewables target that was increased and proposed, some clarification on that gray part came about. Here we understood that actually the numbers add up, and now that remaining part was attributed to hydrogen. Now, to put it into perspective for you, this would increase a demand which was estimated at 2.2 million tons of hydrogen to 4.3 million tons of hydrogen, a nearly double. Of course, from a Hydrogen Europe perspective, from the industry side, we very much welcome such development, especially as this comes as a clear sign to investors, which is badly needed at the moment. The multipliers in maritime and aviation, also coming later on, somehow from the Parliament side a bit more, are very encouraging. However, there is still quite a lot of uncertainty. Now, the overall demand for hydrogen in transport amounts to some 4.2 million tons, as I mentioned a bit earlier. If we deduct the amount of fuels dedicated to maritime and implement the e-fuel target of, let's say, 6%, which is what we in Hydrogen Europe advocated for, and the refuel EU aviation target of 0.7 by 2030, we would still have some 3.4 million tons left for transport and blending in refineries. Now, when looking at the AFIR targets for refueling stations, we were looking at the stations to have about, let's say, 2 tons of hydrogen delivered every day. And then that's over the corridors. Now, in the urban nodes, we estimated it to about 500 kilos a day. All this together led to a demand of about 1 million tons of hydrogen in 2030. Therefore, there's still a huge market share between that 1 million ton and the 3.4, which could be scaled in sectors such as maritime and aviation. Naturally, we, as Hydrogen Europe, would like to see some more coherence in between the different numbers that are being put forward. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is clearly an indicator that the market share is out there and hydrogen is there to fill it. Now, the big question, of course, is where will this hydrogen come from? And before we dive into the map that I prepared, I'd like to mention the one key element that perhaps can make or break the sector. And I think this is a very good slide that illustrates what is actually needed for this renewable hydrogen to come about. I think it is very clear, and I would like to mention that once and foremost, there is no renewable hydrogen without renewable electricity. This is simply a fact. Likewise, it is a fact that renewable electricity deployment isn't moving fast enough or as fast as we'd like. This is why it is imperative to finalize the revision of the Renewables Directive. I was very happy to hear that also from Katarina Sikov-Magni a bit earlier. It is likewise key to factor in the proposal of the Commission on permitting rules, establish renewable go-to areas and so on. But I would like to also mention, and you probably understand where I'm taking it, where I'm going with this, that it is likewise important to have finalized this delegated act on additionality and have finally a renewable hydrogen definition that will be workable for both local production but also for third countries. Here I'd like to also leave no room for interpretation. Hydrogen Europe is not against additionality. We fully recognize its importance. As I mentioned earlier, there is no renewable hydrogen without renewable electricity. Our concerns have always laid with its practical implementation, and the task at hand is to indeed find a balance between ensuring renewable hydrogen is really renewable and has the sustainability criteria that we need, and avoiding excessive constraints on a nascent market. A few key initiatives come to mind, but and this is why we've put together this map that brings all of them together, a cumulative hydrogen projects map in Europe. We identified some over 110 gigawatts of power to hydrogen projects. Their variability is strongly linked to the regulatory framework, to the definition of renewable hydrogen, to the binding targets that I mentioned earlier, and to infrastructure availability. If I can leave one message with you, it is that renewable hydrogen needs the right regulatory framework in place. It is absolutely imperative to have the right setting, to have the right market design elements, but also to have the right infrastructure in order to be able to take off the ground renewable hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuels, e-fuels, and many others in all the sectors that we have been discussing on this panel for the past half an hour or so. I'd like to thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you, Felicia. Our name of the Alliance has two components. First, we talk about renewable, which is, of course, based on the RED discussions, and that's how our indications on the political directions actually suggest. But we also talk in the name about the low-carbon fuels, and that's why we have our last speaker today. We have Felicia Sapart from CO2 Value Europe to talk to us if there is value in CO2.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm representing the organizer of this session, CO2 Value Europe, which is the association representing the full value chain of carbon capture and utilization actors in Europe. And I will speak with a little bit of a different angle than the other speakers today. I will speak with my climate scientist angle, as I'm the scientific director of the association, and I will discuss the importance and the impact of using captured carbon to produce alternative fuels. And I will focus on the fuels that are made, so based on CO2, that I will call CCO fuels to the presentation. But before speaking about the impact, I think we need to think about why we are here today. Oops, back, sorry. I'm already, can you go back one slide of my first slide? Yeah, thank you. And the reason why we are here today is because we need to find urgent solutions to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions from the maritime and the aviation sectors. The global greenhouse gas emissions, so not only taking these sectors, have never been as high as today. And if we follow the current policy globally, so I'm not only speaking about Europe here, we are clearly going straight to the wall. So if we want to prevent a massive degradation of life on Earth, we need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, so it means that we need to drastically decrease our greenhouse gas emissions, and that very quickly. We need to invert the trend, so to go from a trend where we are increasing to a trend where we're going to stabilize and hopefully decrease greenhouse gas emission by 2025, so this is an extremely challenging target. But we also need to halve our emissions by 2030, and this is one of the targets of the Commission, and also to reach climate neutrality by 2050. And to do so, we speak a lot about decarbonizing our emissions, or decarbonizing our different industrial sectors and transport sectors. But in fact, thinking about decarbonizing things, consider that we think about the symptoms. Because the problem is that for many, many years, several decades, we have extracted fossil carbon, and we have put this fossil carbon to our atmosphere, and this is the reason of the climate instability that we observe now. But what we need to do is to work on the cause. It means that we need to defossilize our economy, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so the IPCC, has been very clear in the last assessment report that has been published a few months ago, that no more investment on fossil carbon infrastructures are compatible with reaching climate objectives. So it means that we have to phase out coal very quickly and to continue with phasing out oil and gas as much as possible by 2050. So this means that we have an urgent need for low carbon energy sources for the transport sectors and for the other sectors in general. But it also means that we need carbon feedstocks, so carbon alternatives. So as Emmanuel presented, we can use biomass, but we also have CO2 or CO as sources, or recycled plastic. These three types of feedstock are not magical solutions. They all have their constraints and their limits. So now we have to think very strategically about how do we combine these different solutions to create a carbon circular economy and move away from fossil carbon. Next, please. And it's where carbon capture and utilization, so CCU, comes in place. So what is carbon capture and utilization? It's the fact of using CO2 or directly from the air or from flue gas emission, using renewable energy and convert this CO2 into different types of products. We can do it to create building materials where CO2 is stored permanently, but also renewable chemicals or renewable fuels, and this is a subject we are considering here. So we can create most of the hydrocarbons we need using CO2 and renewable hydrogen. Next, please. And CCU technology enabled to reduce emissions, to avoid them, and to remove it. And this is sometimes not very well understood. Next, please. And so I like to define what it means exactly. So reducing emissions, and that is what we should do right now urgently, means that we should add less CO2 into the atmosphere. And the largest reduction in absolute carbon emission today could be achieved by the coupling of highly concentrated CO2 sources, that we go to really these sources where CO2 is very concentrated. So the big emitters of CO2, we capture this CO2 and we make it react with renewable hydrogen. So the hydrogen that is made out electrolysis of water using renewable electricity via the power to X concept. But if we think at mid-term, we should also think about closing the loop, so avoiding emissions. And avoiding emissions means that we reduce the CO2 emission by avoiding the use of a specific emission-producing service, and that entirely. So it means that we should shift to the lowest emission mode of the providing the service. And this we can do it in storing CO2 permanently, well, in the ground, but also in products, for example, via mineralization. But when it comes to fuels, we can do it if we close the loop. So when we think about midterm, we should think that, yes, we're going to take the CO2 from an industry, we are going to convert it into fuel, so we're going to use it in the maritime, in the aviation sectors, but then we should take it again, likely directly in the air, and put it back in the loop to really create close to zero emission processes. And the third phase, and that will happen a bit later, if we think about timeline, is a CO2 removal. So the fact of removing CO2 from the atmosphere, so to create really a CO2 sink, so really a negative emissions. And this, again, we can do it if we think about this closed loop and if we manage to really keep the CO2 that we captured in the atmosphere in the loop. Next, please. So here we really need to think about the timeline. And the emergency right now is to really reduce the emissions by all means, and in thinking also very strategically on a mid and longer term. Next, please. So if we think about potential of CCU fuels, if we look at the scientific literature, and that's also one of the pillar of what we do in our organization, we know that CCU fuels, and I think this is quite obvious to many of you, are drop-in solutions, because it means that we can, with CO2 and renewable hydrogen, we can make most of the hydrocarbons that we are using today. We can make e-kerosene, we can make methanol, etc., that can be used in existing infrastructures. And when we look at the emergency of the situation now, we need to think about solutions that can be used as soon as possible to decrease the emissions, especially in the maritime and in the aviation sectors that are continuously increasing now. And we also need to think a bit on the longer term. So it's the difficulty of the problem is that we need urgent solutions, but we also need to have a view on how it will evolve. And I think this is one of the bottleneck here. And CCU fuel can compensate for seasonal energy supply fluctuations, because we can also use this energy to create fuels, but we also again need to think very well about the setting. And it contributes to enhance energy security, energy sovereignty, and I think this, considering the crisis today, this is very important. So it means that we could really provide energy at the EU scale, as a national scale, and at the more local scales using the CCU fuels. And they also allow to reduce, so as I said, the greenhouse gas intensity, especially of sectors that are hard to abate, where we hardly have any other solutions, as the maritime, again, and the aviation sectors. Next, please. So the estimated potential of the scale-up of CCU fuels varies widely from 1 to 2 gigaton of CO2 per year, of gigaton utilization per year. So it's more or less maximum 10% of the current emissions. And this large range between 1 and 4.2 depends very much on, not on the technologies, because many technologies are there and they are moving very fast and going up in terms of technology readiness level. Many are close to be ready to be commercialized. But what constrains this number, in fact, it's more the construction of a favorable policy framework for the development of these CCU fuels, and also the market penetrations of these fuels. And we have to remember that most of the infrastructures are there for the utilization, so we need also to think up the chain, to think about the infrastructure to store and transport the CO2. Next, please. But we need to think again about the impacts. And if we want to increase the impact of the use of CCU fuels, we really need to have a very systematic view. We need to think about the sources of carbon that we are using. So right now, we need to use all the carbon we can. But with the time, we will hopefully have way less carbon coming out of the flue gases. So we will use the carbon mostly from the direct air capture, so from the atmosphere. And the impact of using these different sources of carbon is not the same, so this has to be assessed very carefully. We also need to think about the energy requirements. We need to use low carbon energy, otherwise it makes absolutely no sense in the process, and it might even emit more greenhouse gases than what it takes. We need to think about the type of technologies for the capture and for the conversion, and enormous work, and this sector is accelerating very fast, is done in this, on this subject. So to improve the capture and to improve the conversion of the CO2. We need to think about the type of product we want to make and maybe prioritize at some point what do we really need, because this is really what it is about. And think also about the storage duration. But it's not just the storage duration that will tell you if it's good to do CCU or not, because we need to think in a closed loop, and we need to think about the product we actually need. And what is maybe the most important is that we need to ensure that the fuels that we are making are substituting fossil carbon, and they are not adding, because we have to think also in terms of sobriety, and we are not going to be able to reach climate targets if we do not keep that in mind. So we need to decrease globally the amount of fuel that is used, and the fuels that we will still have to use should be renewable fuels. We need also to think in terms of market penetrations and develop that in the framework also for the product, and of the geographical setting. You don't do like a big carbon capture and utilization project anywhere. You need to think about the infrastructure. For example, harbors are a very good area to develop that, where you have renewable electricity, you have CO2 emitters, you have infrastructure for transport and storage of gases and liquids, and you also have users of potentially of CO2 and producer of hydrogen. Next, please. And the most important is to think in a very strategic and systematic way, and that all the decisions we take in terms of production and project related to CCU fuels should be based on life cycle analysis, because one CCU solution is not the other, and we cannot just say, okay, CCU is good or CCU is not good, or CCU fuels are not good. We need to think about it in really different ways, and also to think in the context where it is utilized, and remember that it's not just about decarbonization, but they're also bringing solutions as alternative carbon feedstock. So I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Celia. That was indeed very important to remember. CO2 and hydrogen are two essential ingredients for the manufacturing of synthetic fuels, and while we have seen in the cloud that awareness about hydrogen is is very high on the agenda, everybody seems to understand that, but CO2 I think is much more often forgotten. So it is important to keep that in the picture, where actually we will be getting the CO2 for these processes. Now we have seen and we have heard a lot of testimonies about how important it is to be member of the alliance, what it brings. Can I maybe ask to show the last slide from my presentation? Now the question is, we have 160 members already, but that number is far too low for actually ensuring that the alliance has impact on the value chain and delivers. Therefore, we need to have more members. We need all of the potential companies and stakeholders that can be part of this value chain to be also member. There is the process is ongoing. You can apply at any time. There is no fees. It is also a flexible formula of a membership. It can be adjusted to your capacity, how deeply you would want to be involved. Now we have still a couple of minutes left for the questions. I have seen that questions have been popping up through the Slido. Everybody in the room can also ask the questions through the Slido or raise the hands. Maybe you also encourage you to vote on the questions that you have seen that, so that we make sure that the questions that are most popular can be asked. So I will maybe give you some time to reflect if you want to ask your question directly in the room by raising your hand, and in the meantime, tune to the questions that we have seen already being open. And yeah, so maybe the first question I can see, yeah, for Julien, there is no name, it's an anonymous question for Julien. Is the expected price your potential buyers are willing to pay for SAF aligned with the production costs?
Thank you, Michel. This is a very important and tough question, I must say, because this is clearly one of the main topics we will have to address in the context of the Alliance. We know that today, many numbers are given about the price of sustainable aviation fuels. We are speaking about 2 to 5 to 6 times the cost of kerosene. So one of the key topics we have to address is to reduce the gap between the two prices. And I think that clearly there is a need, naturally respecting the commercial issues for all the producers, etc. There's a need to at least have a clear view on the main drivers of the costs of SAF, and also to reflect on how we can fill the gap between the two. And this is clearly one of the points that Paolo and I referred to earlier about contract for difference, because we know that if we want to give a strong signal to airlines and to help them use more and more sustainable aviation fuels, we need to address this price. So this is clearly one of the key topics of the roundtable on aviation. We will try to at least find the good way to reduce the gap between SAF and kerosene.
Thank you, Julien. I can maybe answer the other question that has thrown up, which I think is for the Commission, is about the role of the road transport. Is the Alliance focusing only on the aviation and maritime sector, or is the road sector also taken into account? So it has been a strategic decision at the time of creating the strategy that the Alliance would be a flanking measure for the refueling, for the 2 refuel initiatives, maritime and aviation, because we observed that there is a particular need to develop rapidly production capacity for the fuels that can make those mandates that are coming happen. And while road transport has already developed a value chain, we have not seen a similar urgency in the need for having this sort of instrument helping boosting a supply for road transport. That does not mean that the road transport is completely absent from the focus of our Alliance. We have seen in the slides of the projections, demand in the road transport will continue to grow, but at some point in time, we will see a dramatic shift towards the fuels that would be delivered to the aviation and maritime sector. And that transition period will be difficult for those companies. The Alliance, we want to have those companies that are active in the road transport to be active, to be prepared, to also guide them and help them in a diversification of their client base, so they can become a part of the upcoming value chains for the maritime and aviation fuels. That we believe is the right choice given the trends that we will see from the mandates. It is also important in the context of the Alliance to not to cannibalize the feedstocks. That's why we also will collaborate on the current basis with the fuels suppliers in the road transport to make sure that the feedstock that we use is, there is no race to the bottom and there is no pricing out from particular sectors. That's why the road transport will be in our eye, and we will be continue to collaborate. Yet the main principle, the 2 pillars of the Alliance are focusing on the maritime and aviation. I hope I answered the question. Now we have another, I think the most popular question is of a more open nature, and I will ask it maybe to the panelists who would want to take it. Can zero carbon fuels really make the aviation? And I think we can add maritime neutral studies show that we need to reduce travel to reach neutrality. Who would want to answer? I see Celia. Yes, please.
I think we should not oppose both. I think we clearly need both. In a climate point of view, none of the sector will be fully carbon neutral, because the carbon neutrality does not depend only on the fuel. It's much broader than that. But in fact, we do need alternative fuels, absolutely, and we do need to decrease the amount to reduce the amount of travel from both sectors. So it's not, again, we need to work on both very efficiently and as fast as possible.
Anybody who wants to comment? Julien.
Yes, because it was originally less to the aviation sector, and this is clearly, it was rightly pointed out in the question. This is something that you often see in the studies relating to the decarbonization of the aviation sector. This is not up to the aviation sector to dictate what we need to do about travel. This is a private issue and also an issue about the industry and how we are organized. I would just point out two things. First of all, we are working on this. As for Safran, for example, with all these industrial partners, we are clearly trying to develop all the technological solutions that are in our hands to reach this target of carbon neutrality by 2050. We are speaking about billions of euros invested in R&D to develop new engines, to develop new aerostructures, to develop new electrical engines or hybridization or hydrogen use to reach this target. But then naturally, it's also a question of behavior and what people want to do with travel. For us, we need to be there to propose this kind of solutions, and for producers to propose the sustainable aviation fuels that we need to have also on aircraft.
Yes, thank you, Julien. Let's move to the next question, which is also quite popular now. It is, what are the key hurdles for renewable fuels uptake? Infrastructure, prices of production, economic incentives to replace fossil fuels by renewable fuels? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Michael. So it's a very pertinent question. It's really the key question, I would say. And thanks for posing that, because it brings us to a very important angle to tackle upon. So first of all, let me touch a couple of points. We believe that the key message in order to overcome the hurdles for the production of the low-carbon fuels is to keep a combination of technological options open. Have a sort of a priori selection might damage the upscale of low-carbon fuels. And therefore, in the presentation that I illustrated a couple of minutes ago to you, we, in our path, we have a combination of technology options. So we cannot bet now on which kind of options will be in the future from now to 2050. We have a lot of potentials that it is left unexploited, but we need really not to cut ourselves the pathway. Another point that I would like to comment on is about the mission of the Alliance. So building on what Michael just said about the fact that maritime and aviation, so the two main hard-to-abate sector, are of course the bulk of the Alliance. It is also recognized that there is no a priori exclusion of the synergies, as Michael said, with the road transport sector. At this point in time, we need to build the upscale production, and therefore we need to use all synergies and exploit all potentials that we can in order to make the utmost of it. And then, of course, serve the two sectors that are in most need. And finally, I would like to conclude with a point that we very much count on the Alliance for resolving that. One of the key hurdles we see for the uptake of renewable fuels is the visibility. It might sound a bit rhetoric, but in fact, it is very much so. Today, for example, there is a little quantity already in the pumps of low-carbon fuels ready for the consumers. But the consumers cannot really make the difference of what kind of fuel they are using. They cannot see really the benefit of the fuels they are using if they are choosing a low-carbon fuels or a fossil one. They don't see any difference. And we really believe that the Alliance might turn this point into something else, bringing the visibility part to the final consumers, the end consumers, but also to the industries that are engaged in the aviation and maritime sector. So thank you. Back to you, Mikael.
Yes, please. Yes, microphone, please.
I just want to. Thank you. I just want to answer the previous question as well, but also this one. On the previous one, on the targets, on the quotas, I mean, I think quotas are a game changer in itself in the maritime and aviation, but also in other sectors. Having quotas is of absolute importance, as they clearly pull demand. They create a market for products that are much cleaner on one side, but also they create a market and help upscale native projects and native fuels that are much more expensive. There is no other way than this one to make them competitive on the market. And clean fuels being a nascent sector, they need this market creation mechanism. So this is on one side. On the other, of course, what are the hurdles? I think there's so many hurdles right now, with especially when having a nascent sector, and especially as you said earlier, and we are talking about maritime and aviation, and these sectors have been struggling a bit. Taking on these newer technologies for the most obvious reasons. But I think when we look at hydrogen production itself, from my point of view, I mean, we have targets in place. We're moving closer to trilogues. We have all this great system that we've put together, which is great, but we don't even know what is, the language that we are speaking. We still don't have a definition for renewable hydrogen. We're talking about 10 million tons of imports, but we don't know how we're going to certify them. So I think matching the ambition, the main hurdle right now is matching the ambition with the reality check, both on the side of infrastructure, both on the side of the industry, of course, and making sure that they can deliver on everything, but also from the side of the policymakers of saying, okay, here is a full harmonized picture. This is something you can work with.
I will get back to you with another question that shows up, but maybe quickly, because we have still 4 minutes to go. Celia, can you answer the most popular question, which is the CO2 storage in the chain?
Yes, so it's not that we are not taking into account the CO2 storage, it's that we speak about a circular carbon economy, and if we speak about carbon storage, we stay in this very linear system where we emit CO2 and then we store it. And this storage will be clearly needed to mitigate climate change. There is no question about it. But we believe that this storage should happen after we have done everything to reduce emission, to avoid emissions, and then to circulate the carbon. Because as I said before, we will need alternative carbon. So we need to think circular if we want to have enough carbon to continue to live as we do now, or even if we think about sobriety. So the storage should really come at the very end of the chain, so it will be the little line that is a more linear line going out of this circularity.
Yes. Thank you. Back to Felicia with the question about where the electricity will be coming from. For both actually hydrogen production and CCU, we know electricity is needed. Where it actually will be coming from?
Well, I think it's quite clear when we're speaking of renewable hydrogen or Renewables, it has to be a renewable electricity. So where it's going to come from is going to come from renewables. Clearly, and this is something I've mentioned earlier, there is no renewable hydrogen without renewable electricity. So yes, permitting is a problem. Yes, we have a very big shortage of renewable energy. That is a fact. That is not something new that I'm going to say. But yeah, of course, we need the renewable energy to have a renewable hydrogen. Now, of course, when we speak about low carbon hydrogen, I think that's another question that we also will need to tackle, but we're even farther away from that one. So I can only bring the ball back to you.
Yes, indeed, there will be a lot of discussions about electricity in the context of the RED. But that's, well, not my department, if I can say that bluntly. Let's maybe close the discussion with the last question to Paolo. If he's still with us,
Yes, I am.
Yes, there is a question about the green ammonia. Where is it? It disappeared, I don't know. What about the role of green ammonia?
As I said before, in my presentation, I think there is no silver bullet. So green ammonia definitely is one of the options that is on the table. We're starting the activities in the Renewable Low Carbon Fuel Industrial Value Chain Alliance with no preconceived approach. So it will be up to the first phase of the study of the roundtable to identify what can be the potential and the path for green ammonia in maritime.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. There is also one question that I wanted to touch upon that is actually lower. It's about from John, well, I don't know it, yes, John McLeod asks about how to promote market collaboration without triggering antitrust investigations. Actually, this is a very good point, and that's where the Alliance can actually help. As part of our discussions, we are engaged in the sort of changing the mindset in DG Comp. Our colleagues in that field seems to understand that dramatic changes in the value chains require industrial collaboration, and that there needs to be adaptation on our rules on the antitrust. So the Alliance itself is a vehicle of a safe conversation. It's a space that we as a Commission provide for the industry to engage in the activities that are ultimately collaborating of the industry to allow coordination of the investments. Now, we really need to close, and we will be closing that maybe with asking the last question on the slide, which is the questions we prepared in advance. I'd want all the audiences to vote on the question, can we ask the technicians to put the question on the display? Which area do you think the Alliance has the opportunity to be the most impactful? And I hope that we have provided that answers today, but we would want to hear from you. Four questions. Please use your phones, please your devices. It's just a very easy code to go there. Market deployment is on the lead. Technical deployment, funding and scaling of technologies, that's also a very good point. Well, I think we are really good on a good track with this answer. Thank you very much. And I also thank you to all our panelists for the great discussion and presentations. And we hope that you enjoy their sessions. Thank you.